You may be a user of OTT, and you may love the way it brings all the details up. But is there a better way? Well, one of the issues with Ableton's OTT and the X for OTT is there's no linear phase option. There's no oversampling. So what happens is the cutoffs create a difference in the phase. It creates a phase offset, which creates a lot of little and smearing. And it gives it this weird digital glitchy character. So you may be getting all that detail, but you're also getting a digital smearing effect when you use OTT. So if you're using it on anything that sounds kind of analog and warm, it's going to make it colder. It's going to make it feel less realistic. So this tutorial is about how to do it with Pro MB. Fantastic multiband compressor. I use it all the time. It's a great plugin. I highly recommend it. Let me turn up my voice just a second, just a little bit more. There we go. Yeah, I think that's okay. So let's go. I got a loop, and I'll turn off the OTTs. Here's what the loop sounds like without the fabfilter OTT. So there's a lot going on in terms of frequency content, but let's get even more going on. So now I will turn on the OTTs. Now it sounds like this. So I just mapped the on and off buttons of both the OTTs to my tilde key on my QWERTY keyboard. And that's a great way to A/B test things. So it's probably making it a little bit louder too, so that's why it sounds better, but try to listen to how full it is. Let me try to gain match these real quick. So let me get a Voxengo span, and I'll put it on this group, and I'll just try to gain match them. Oh, also I'm blending in the dry signal with the OTT signal. So normal OTT doesn't do that, so let's actually mute this channel here on both the OTT racks. Okay, so now they're both hitting right here at -3 dB. The drums are hitting at 0 dB, so there's a 3 decibel difference. So now listen to the A/B, before and after with the OTT with the Pro MB. So now I'll take a normal OTT and I'll put it on both channels and show you what that sounds like. So I'm going to key map the power buttons on both of these normal OTTs, and now we can go back and forth and compare the two. So first I'll do the old OTT, and then I'll do the Pro MB OTT, and I'll do dry in between. So you can hear that the OTT is much more extreme. The old school OTT, it's much more extreme. It's keeping things louder for way longer than this one is. So if we wanted to have a more extreme effect, we can duplicate the OTTs, the fabfilter OTTs. Now our gain matching is going to be off with this, but now you can hear what let me key map these real quick. Now you can hear what the double Pro MB OTT sounds like. Hold on. I had it all backwards. Let me turn the normal OTT off and then make sure. Okay, so now this is before and after with the duplicated Pro MB. So you can see they're getting close, and you can definitely tell the Pro MB is having the OTT effect. The OTT effect comes from doing downward compression after upward compression. So your upward compression into downward compression, and I copied these settings into two Pro MBs. The first one is doing upwards compression, and the second one is doing downwards compression. The first one is doing upwards compression, and I copied all these parameters. So the ratio is the same. The threshold at the below stage is around 40 minus 40. So if you can see right here, the threshold is around minus 40. I put it to 36. So I could decrease that even more to give it just a little bit more room. And so basically the idea is the upwards compression threshold is lower at 40 dB than the downwards compression, which is at 30 dB, the threshold. And then it's basically just like a short attack and a medium short release. And then you boost the output, and you can boost the gain on the way in. So you can see I've boosted the gain on the way in and then attenuated it slightly. I'll probably macro them up at some point, but that's the basic idea. You have one Pro MB doing this side of the OTT, and then you have another one doing this side. And then what I like to do is put it in parallel with the dry signal, so you're doing parallel compression. And you notice the other thing I'm doing differently is I'm leaving the sub uncompressed. I didn't feel like I needed to compress the sub, but if you really wanted to emulate this OTT, you would have another band doing the same thing where you're doing extreme compression. You got the amount all the way. The range is all the way cranked. And then, you know, soft knee, longer release than the attack. So you're really crushing the dynamics. And yeah, so if you do it in parallel, you crush your dynamics and then you mix that lower. So you're taking that noise floor and you're boosting the noise floor and you're crushing your dynamics. But then if you mix it in with the dry signal, you get that snappy, clean transient coming back in, but with a louder noise floor. That's basically what you're doing with OTT is you're taking the noise floor and you're boosting it and you're destroying your dynamic range. So destroying your dynamic range sounds good on SoundCloud, but that's about it. If you destroy your dynamic range completely, it doesn't sound nearly as good on big systems. It doesn't sound nearly as good in headphones. You need that punch. You need that transient. So try blending it in parallel. You could do the same thing with an OTT by just grouping it, creating another chain, and then mixing it in. All right, so I hope that explains it. The way I did this was I just copied the settings. So I'll do it from scratch just so you know exactly how to do this because it can be kind of confusing at first. So let's get an OTT. And that way we can copy the settings. Now let's get a Pro MB. And I did not have those set to to linear phase, but you can set it to linear phase and then crank the oversampling when you're rendering down your stems. So you can do it one stem at a time and use like your whole processor just to get the cleanest result. And you get a much less smeary, much less digital, much more transparent result where all that detail will be that much clearer and untainted by the Ableton OTT. So if we want to emulate this exactly, and remember, Pro MB lets you have up to 5 bands. So you could do a 5-band OTT and you could have complete control over the highs, the upper mids, the mid mids, the low mids, and the sub. So you could have full-blown bands. But remember, the more bands you do, the harder Pro MB has to work to keep it from smearing and to keep the phase aligned. This is going to add latency to your project. You should know that as well. So if you're trying to play shit in, try to do that stage before you start mixing. So what we're going to want to do is we're first going to want to create this upwards compression stage. So I'm going to have it on compress instead of expand. So make sure it's on compress. We're going to want the ratio at what? So if we want to know the below, that's this little B right here on the OTT. And then it'll tell you the ratio. So the low band ratio is 1:4. So we can put the ratio at 1:4. Oh, wait. Yeah, see, this is important to realize. On the Pro MB, the ratio is, it gives you a percentage of 1 to 1:1. And this says 1:4. 1:1, it goes all the way up to 1:10. So how can we recreate that? Well, what I think is, 11:1, 1:1. It's a little confusing what that means. It's a little bit confusing. So what I did was I did a light ratio. Basically, the more intense the ratio, kind of the more intense the compression, if I understand correctly. So let's just leave it there. It's set to soft knee, so let's dial in a pretty soft knee. If you get any glitching or weirdness, or if you want it to work better, you can increase the look ahead, but that's going to add a lot of latency to your project because the latency allows it to look ahead in the timeline to be able to better expect where all the transients are going to be. That's what look ahead does. It adds latency, and then it uses that latency to have more time to figure out what it's going to do before it does it. Let's just leave it at 0 milliseconds for now, or maybe 1 millisecond. So next is the range. So actually the threshold here. So you can see that the yellow letters here, the yellow numbers are the threshold. So about 40 on each. So let's put this down on 40. Put this down on 40. Put this down on 40. Okay, now let's dial in our ratio for each band. Let's do like that, maybe like that. Soft knee, soft knee. The softer the knee, the less kind of jerky the sound of the compression is going to be, but it's also going to be kind of slower and less intense. So you can see that each band is boosted, right? So because you're doing compression, it's going to attenuate the volume a lot. So to compensate for that, we're going to boost it up, right? But hold on a second. We're doing compression, but we're doing downward compression. We want to do upward compression first. So to do upward compression in Pro MB, you want to move these ranges up above these little nodes, right? So that you're compressing up. You're taking what's underneath and pushing it up, right? You're taking the quieter parts and you're making them louder. Now, let's check the attack release times. Yeah, so the attack time is 13, 22, and 40. So on the low one, we can do, this is a percentage instead of millisecond time, so you can kind of just guess. But it's a little bit more of an attack, a little bit more of a release, a little bit less of an attack for the mids. Same thing with the release. And this is the kind of thing that it's just a starting point, and then once you listen to the sound going through, you can tweak these parameters, and it'll help. Okay, so now I think we have all the parameters. These cutoffs, you can change the cutoff depending on what you want. Maybe 100 hertz for the low cutoff, or maybe 200. Let's put it at 100. And then for the highs, maybe 2K or 1K. Let's try 1K. 1400. So I think that's good. I think let's boost the output. Right? Can kind of boost the output. And let's group this. And then let's dupe this. And now all we have to do is basically just drag these down. And now we're doing downwards compression. And for the downwards compression, let's go to the above threshold here on the OTT and check it. So 33, 30, and 35. So let's put the threshold at 33. This one's 30. And this one's 35. Okay, so now we are super compressing. And the window in which everything is getting squished into is between 40 and 30 dB. You can see right here, this is the window that we're talking about, this little space in between the lower and the upper compression stages. So now we can delete the OTT, and we have our OTT, and we can even start to macro things up. So let's do, actually, I would recommend not macroing it up unless you really want to, because you can just go into the plugins and adjust them. It's not really that hard. You can control the overall gain with the chain, so maybe I'll macro that. Call it OTT gain. And then we can have a dry chain here. So we have OTT, we'll make that green, and then orange for the dry. Well, let's make the dry green and the OTT orange. So now we want to go into the map, and maybe we do want to be able to boost it up to 6 dB, but for default, let's keep it around 0. With the dry gain, we'll map it to macro 2, call it dry gain. That way, if you have like a MIDI controller and you like twiddling knobs when you're mixing, you can do that. You know, you could macro up the below and the above thresholds and do all that. But for now, let's just leave it simply OTT gain and dry gain. So now, we can turn the dry gain down, and we can listen to what we have here on this bass. So before, after, so you can see by tweaking the ratios of the bands, by tweaking the gain boost and the cutoffs, you can dial in the right mix amount, and then mixing it in with the dry can bring some life back into it while also retaining that boosted extra detail. So that's the basic preset, and I'm going to save it. Sephiroth fabfilter OTT. Put it on blue. And now you can load that up if you want to give some extreme compression. And remember, duplicate it 3 times, and you have an extreme OTT effect. Let's listen to what that sounds like. So this is where some macros might come in handy. If you macro them up, then you could actually group these 3 together and then start mapping those macros to this one and have like a super OTT. So yeah, some ideas on ways you could take that further. Things I would map to macros. I guess let's just map it up just to be clear. So let's open up the macros. Because macros in Ableton 11 are cool because you can actually save presets and then switch between them, which is really cool if you're like really in the mix mode and comparing things. So let's add a bunch of macros. Let's do the below first. So we want to be able to control the gain of each band. So let's do the output. So we're going to hit configure, click the output, map to macro 3, label it up for upward compression, up comp, gain, low. So up comp gain low. For this second one, same thing. Map to macro 4. Up comp gain mid. And then here we go for the high. Configure output. Map to macro 5. What the hell? Up comp gain high. And let's do the overall output. So we can map the overall output to macro 6 and call that up gain total. And then we could do the ratios, but I think those ratios are pretty good where they're at, and you don't want to go overboard with this. You don't want it to be super overwhelming, but I think that's good. Just being able to control the gain of the bands individually, I think, is good. It's also good to be able to control the threshold. But I think for now, I'll just leave it at that. Same thing here. I'm going to do the output, map to macro 7, down, comp gain low. Oops. I'll just call it down gain low because I know what that means. Here we go with the second. Call this down gain mid. And then up here, what in the hell? It's because I really have to pee. Okay. Down gain high. So down gain high. So now we can control the different gains. Let's also do the global amount. Down gain. Yep, so we could use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 more of these macros, but I don't think we will. Wait, if I get rid of one more, are we missing anything? Up gain, total, down low, mid, high, down gain. Okay, so that's pretty good. So now you can see that we can dive into here if we need to change the ratios or whatever, but at least we can control the gain of each band with macros, and that will enable us to group this and then map to macro 1, map to macro 2, map to macro 3, map to macro 4, etc., etc. And this will allow us to then duplicate. So now we can duplicate this and it'll keep that macro mapping. And now we have a triple OTT. And that's really useful for things like Neuro design, base design of all types, getting interesting glitch effects, put it on stuff with noise if you really want to bring that noise to the front. And then we can close this and just control the gain, dry gain. These are probably going to be what you're using the most. And then I guess we'll simplify this. We'll just call this upward low, because we know these are gain. Upward mid. Upward high. Upward global. Downward low. Downward mid. Downward high. Downward global. Yeah, so call this triple OTT Sephiros fabfilter and save it. Boom. Put it in a favorites. So now we have the triple OTT, and then let's actually pull this out. I'm going to rename these. What is going on? Why is that happening? My keyboard's acting up. All right, so there is our individual Sephiroth fabfilter OTT. Overwrite it. So yeah, now that's the triple, the regular, and yeah, you can turn on linear phase if you want. It's going to be a cleaner result than the Ableton OTT, but give you a similar effect. So let's go back here. Thanks for watching. I hope that helped you. In-depth tutorial on how to create OTT with FabFilter Pro MB. Yeah, needless to say, if you like the video, like and subscribe, follow me. I create a Patreon. I create a sample pack once a month that I put out on Patreon. I offer lessons, one-on-one Zoom lessons on Patreon if you want to learn anything else. And music on all platforms at Sephiroth.